Now, China has typically described Indian-Philippine drills as, quote, disrupting regional peace and stability, while its own military carried out patrols in the South China Sea and, together with Russia, practiced hunting and destroying an enemy submarine in the Sea of Japan as part of broader naval drills involving live firing, anti-submarine ships and aircraft. Helicopters, 2 Chinese destroyers and multiple submarines from both countries took part. Meanwhile, also during the Indian-Philippine drill, a series of 5 loud booming explosions were heard from the Philippine island of Palawan. They were later confirmed to have come from a rocket launch in the Chinese province of Hainan. What you see here is a visible condensation trail consistent with rocket exhaust or propulsion. Renato, staying on you. But this wasn't the first time. So what was different about this?
Well, the fact that the Filipinos heard the sonic boom and they saw the debris falling. It might be an accident, but some Filipino analysts are saying, again, this needs to be proven, that it was actually intended. Basically telling us a signal, you are on the reach of our land-based missiles. So be wary. You're allowing the Americans to bring in the Typhoon, the Nemesis. Basically we have the capability to hit you. And we just showed it to you that our missiles could reach as far as the westernmost part of the Philippines, and that's Palawan.
So you do see it as essentially a form of grey zone warfare?
Yeah, I would call a two-edged signal. On the one hand, they could say, "Oh, it's an accident," but on the other hand, it's also a warning.
Because it's very similar to what Admiral Samuel Papafro, the U.S. Indo-PACOM commander, has said, is that Chinese exercises, drills around Taiwan are actually rehearsals and that they could switch to war at any point.
Yes, because in the past we have received that threats. You have the sister of the president, who's a senator, Senator Amy Marcos, who said he was told by the PLA that we are already on the target list of its missile system. So this will basically confirm what if the warning was indeed true, then they're sending us a message. See, we have the capability to do so.
Roger, so we saw there that China was quick to criticize both Marcos's trip and the Indian-Philippine drills. Of its own drills, of course, it said that they were purely defensive, and Marcos has been clear that any of his moves in terms of security are in reaction to the challenges that he faces. Now, given neither the US nor a Western ally was involved in these drills, did you detect that Beijing's propaganda was different this time?
Well, I think, if you ask Beijing about South China Sea, they will say that everything within the 9-dash line actually belongs to China. And although they have been changing their versions of naming the area, but all in all, they believe that this place actually is under their effective jurisdiction. So any third power, quote unquote, that try to interfere and enter this area will be pushed out, and you will see Beijing keep insisting that all the affairs between China around South China Sea, along with other countries, are actually bilateral events, and that should only be solved between China and the other party. But which is not right, because actually South China Sea is an international water, so the free rights of navigation actually has to be preserved, and all the great powers, including India, the United States, Japan, and all other countries should have the right to sail through these waters.
And how about the usual trope, which is that the Philippines doesn't have agency and it is, basically working for the US? How did that work this time? Maybe I should ask Renato.
Well, also showing to China, we're not simply dependent on our alliance with the United States. We have security partners. We have security partners that are, of course, inside the region, that are capable and willing to provide us assistance. And that is, of course, you have Japan, you have South Korea, you have Vietnam, and of course, right now you have India. So again, it's a matter, as Prime Minister Modi emphasized, it's a matter of choice. It's not a matter of necessity. Of course, alliance is a matter of necessity, but our security partnership with India, as again, quoting Prime Minister Modi, it's a matter of friendship by choice, partnership in terms of destiny, not simply in terms of necessity.
Yeah, a sovereign choice of both the Philippines and India. Sana, so on that theme, to what extent are India and Philippines hedging, could we say, against the US? India has been hit with 50% tariffs.
I think there are 2 points about it. First, that I don't think that anything about this trip was anything to do with Trump, because there is a lot of bilateral engagement, respectively, that's happening from both India and Philippines side. So I do not really see that there is any hedging or there is any collaboration that is happening on the tariff front. But I think I would like to, second part is that I would like to emphasize that, as President Marcos also said, that the disruptions and the tariff are actually telling us that we have to be self-reliant. We have to cooperate among the regional countries. But I think what both Philippines and India, they're trying to do is to perhaps lower down the tariff and also perhaps to manage the crisis. And the idea is perhaps to get the relationship with the US back on track. At least from the Indian side, that is the purpose. So I don't really see that as aimed at the US at all. US is also still considered a very important strategic partner for both the Philippines as well as India. So even though I feel the domestic perception about the US has changed in India, but the government is very much on the same track, that US is a strategic partner.
What do you make of, this is very strategic, it's very clever, because we've got two countries, or the Philippines building ties with an Indo-Pacific power that is not a US treaty ally. How significant is that?
I think we have to see it in its own individual terms, because India has been an important partner for countries such as Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia, and Vietnam, and of course Singapore. So I don't think that, in fact, if we go back to the Indo-Pacific revival, it was Trump's idea. Trump was the one who revived the Indo-Pacific and even the quadrilateral dialogue. And there were a lot of countries such as Taiwan and the Philippines who were actually looking towards Quad to become a greater security apparatus within the region. So in fact, that was the entire idea, that we as like-minded countries have to come together. And of course, there is also this idea that not all the time the US will be there. Of course, we need US presence in the region. There is no doubt about that. But if US is unable to do it at some point, how do we step up and how do we, as like-minded countries, come together and work towards addressing the shared concern?
Roger, on the topic of Quad, it is interesting because India traditionally has had security relationships with Australia and Japan, of course, as well with the US. Now, the Philippines, this is quite a different, reaching beyond Quad itself. What does it say about Quad? Has Quad changed under Trump 2.0?
Well, I think it's yet to be seen, because Trump's tariff war actually has just begun. So the impact is yet to be felt. But I think India is doing the right thing by approaching the Philippines, because now India needs to balance between Vietnam and the Philippines, because now Vietnam, known to have its own bamboo diplomacy, now switched to China a little bit. So now India has to, by approaching the Philippines, have to gain something out of that. And I think India is trying to revive its multilateral military exercise institutions in this region, including the ASEAN-Indian Maritime Exercise, the Milan exercise, and all these bilateral and multilateral things, which is especially important, especially when Donald Trump has been taking unilateral moves, where India will be a stabilizing power in that region by sticking to the idea of multilateralism, which is very important.
Renato, what is it about India and the Philippines coming together? I mean, India perhaps joining the Philippines maritime cooperative activities in the South China Sea, as well as Roger had said, in exercise Milan. Essentially, we see the bringing together, the joining of the Indian Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, beyond Quad.
So, at least from the perspective of the Philippines, we have always been accommodating to Quad. Of course, among the three members of Quad, they're U.S. treaty allies. India is, of course, not a treaty ally of the United States. But by engaging India, establishing a strategic partnership, so again, the Philippines is showing we have, of course, a very cordial, warm relations with Quad. And of course, although Quad was revived during the Trump administration, Quad was actually convened in both instances in Manila. The first one in 2007, then again in 2017. So this is also in a way symbolic. Quad was formed in the Philippines, and now, of course, we have a security partnership, different levels of security partnerships with all members of Quad. And this is also significant in terms also with Taiwan. Because I just attended a conference, two-day conference in Jakarta. It was organized by the Observer Research Foundation, and we were talking about, primarily we were talking about South China Sea. But then I told my Indian colleagues, what about Taiwan? So they started thinking. They said, you haven't factored in Taiwan. When I told them, from the perspective of the Philippines, and this was also emphasized by President Marcos in its interview, we are already factoring the importance of Taiwan. So it's not just a matter of the South China Sea, it's also trying to bring in the Quad, not only in the South China Sea, but also in terms of Taiwan.